Welcome to the Education Marketing Leader podcast with Chris Raposo. If you're looking to dive into the latest industry insights, draw inspiration from education success stories, or just want to sharpen your marketing skills, you're in the right place. Here, we bring you a diverse range of voices from experts and leaders in the field, offering you a unique blend of professional development and practical strategies. Whether you want to understand your audience better, stay updated with the latest tech trends in marketing, or expand your professional network, we've got you covered. So while you're driving on your morning commute or winding down after a busy day, let's explore the dynamic world of education marketing together.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Education Marketing Leader podcast. Today I bring you a special episode. It's the recording of our monthly book club, the Education Marketing Leader Book Club. So we had Brian Piper as a guest today. We talked about his book, Epic Content Marketing for Higher Education. And we had such a good discussion that I figured, you know what, I'm going to repurpose our talk at the book club meeting and make it a podcast. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get some good insights out of it from the more than 20 people that attended today. And if you are in higher education and you are a marketer or interested in learning more about marketing, consider joining the Education Marketing Leader Book Club. I will link to it in the show notes. Take care. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being a part of the Education Marketing Leader Book Club. Today is our second meeting, but it's the first book discussions that we're having. So just a little bit of an intro about me who doesn't know me. My name is Chris Raposo. I'm a podcast host. I'm a marketer, bookworm, storyteller, runner, and father as well. Today's book is all about epic content marketing for higher education, which a lot of you or all of you read, I assume, fully, or maybe not fully, but you have some takeaways from it. About the author, Brian Piper, who's here today, he's going to introduce himself in a little bit, but he's a keynote speaker, consultant, higher ed marketer, podcast host, and author of several books. Brian, what have I missed?
Well, I think you got it all. Yeah. Director of Content Strategy and Assessment at the University of Rochester. I've been in higher ed for about 7 years, and thrilled to be here. Great to see so many people read the book.
All right then. Okay, book discussion. Let's get started, right? So a couple of talking points here. What resonated with you the most? Key themes and insights that stood out. How have you applied any of these concepts at your work, and any sections you found surprising or challenging? So I guess before we kick it off, we want to have the definition of content marketing. So according to the book, content marketing is the marketing and business process for creating and distributing valuable and compelling content to attract, acquire, and engage a clearly defined and understood target audience, with the objective of driving profitable customer action. Guys, anybody want to jump in first? What resonated with the book mostly for you? Let's get this discussion started. And if nobody wants to start, I can start out. What surprised me the most, I never worked on the institutional side, was chapter 2, page 31, why most higher ed institutions don't have a content strategy. That was surprising to me a little bit, and there were several reasons for it: lack of resources, culture, we've always done this way, and we've talked about this just a minute ago, leadership, there's no buy-in there. And I thought, these are all somewhat external excuses, which do make sense in some part, but then Brian really pulls something out here. He said, generally, it comes down to fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of failure, and fear of trying something new. So that really spoke to me there. And I wondered, why fear? Is it fear of looking like an amateur? Is it fear of hurting the institution? Any thoughts on that?
I have comments on that. I think it's
Okay.
fear of all of that. It's fear of public perception. It's fear of crossing the wrong stakeholders. There were some parts in the book that talked about taking chances and not, being bogged down and getting all of your approvals and, living with a culture of experimentation. And I keep trying to push forward that. But since I'm working on the web team and I'm technically part of IT, and we work closely with our marketing team, we meet with them every week and stuff, but they seem to be very scared, and they report at our university, marketing and admissions, enrollment management, they all report up through the same VP. And that VP has been, very mired into the traditional, you buy names and that's how you do recruitment and that whole path. And I'm sitting there, we're changing. We've got very different world after the pandemic. We've got this enrollment cliff. Everything is different. But he also has worked in advancement and fundraising. And he knows that if you've got a crotchety old donor who questions something and they're like, why was this done on your homepage? Then he all of a sudden pulls back from what they're doing. It's like, don't do that. Don't do that. And I'm sorry, we're not recruiting the old donor. That's not who that homepage feature is for. And so I think a lot of it is fear of crossing the wrong stakeholders and getting some kind of bad press out there. And I think that you can walk an experimentation line without crossing any lines. So.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else that has a similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, I can offer a perspective. My background is as a journalist and as a writer. Again, I've been at this for decades, and from the day I walked into my first day at Pitt Magazine to the day that I'm working today, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding across institutions about the power of words and storytelling, no matter the context that they appear in. And I think the biggest challenge that I have is that my clients still think that they can drag the horse to water and make it drink. And what we know about story and content and human emotion is that people read everything that they read with the idea that they would rather come to their own conclusion about what they've read or experienced, if it's a video, if it's an audio, than some predetermined conclusion that the institution may have. And getting clients to embrace that idea, no matter how much scientific evidence I bring to them, they have trouble embracing that idea. And it's really just a matter of sort of getting comfortable with your discomfort. The idea that you ultimately do not control somebody's conclusion about anything that they might read or experience on a website or on a blog or on a magazine or in a video or in a podcast, just shakes institutions and leaders to the core. And for me, that's the central conflict that I deal with every day, trying to get leaders and decision makers to accept that the true power of content lies with your willingness to be uncomfortable with the fact that you don't control somebody's ultimate response to it.
Well said. Well said. Anybody else? I know we have stories. Don't be shy.
I think the thing that I highlighted that is a mic drop for me is your audience does not care about you, your offerings, or your programs. They only care about how those offerings and programs will help them. And two challenges that I see over and over again is improper data and tracking and decisions being made without data informing those decisions. So people will decide to just launch a program because that seems like a great idea. And I ask, where's the market? And how is your program different than XYZ University down the street? And it's, well, we offer this and we offer that. And I said, yes, but that's what every program offers. So what makes you different? And why would a student want to come here? What's the advantage of your program? And you just get a pause. And unfortunately, because data didn't inform things at the beginning, now you're in a little bit of a pickle. And the content strategy can be challenging because of that. So that's something that stuck with me.
I would like to jump in, Chris, because she made mention about these analytics, and this is what stood out for me, because for example, for someone who is not really very familiar with data and analytics and something like that, this is very essential. I have read in the book that using analytics to track the performance of the content is very, very important. In terms of how are you going to help understand, what resonates with your audience and what doesn't if you are not familiar, with the engagement. So, what I did, because since we are just, a startup institution here in Madrid, what I did was to contact my assistant who is in charge of the contents. And then I asked her to provide me with a report today at 2:00, with all the campaigns that we have and we have been sending, and the analytics, I wanted her to explain to me which of this, campaigns got this clicks and engagements and which ones don't. Because what I've understood from the book is that we need to change the content of those who did not click, and we have to maintain or improve those campaigns that did click. So this is what we were discussing before going home today, and I was like, it really is something that is critical now, because from the beginning we were just like, okay, we need to have campaigns every week just to have engagements, but we're not even aware if we are getting engagement out of the campaigns that we are producing. So the idea now is that we have to make sure, that the content of the campaigns that we are sending out are what information the leads are needing, for them to be able to engage. Because if we're just going to think about something that is not really a problem solver, for them, or the information that they're looking for, then it's a waste of time. So I think this is what resonated, with me, the checking the analytics to track the performance of the content.
Yeah. That must make you feel good, Brian, doesn't it? Like somebody's actually reading a book and actually telling their assistant to give me the data. Like, how does that make you feel, Brian?
I love it. I love hearing all the, everyone is aligned with the fact that content marketing is like the perfect fit for higher ed, because we have all these stories. We have, between our faculty, staff, students, we have all these people that are being impacted by, the work we do and our missions, but we're just not telling these stories. We just keep talking about ourselves to ourselves and promoting, all the programs we have and all the things we do without showing people how that impacts them. And I love seeing like, Allison and Maya on here, because I know they're both, doing content marketing, and taking different aspects of it and incorporating that into their institutions, and it works,
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris?
Allison,
Oh.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I'd love to just piggyback off of what Brian was just saying. Kind of the mic drop moment for me reading this was page 86. Brian wrote the shift comes when you start thinking of your content as your product. You're not selling your knowledge transfer to potential students. You're selling the outcome of the education and the impact that it'll have on your user. And it's kind of that same idea of, for so long, I think schools have just marketed the programs. Like, we have this, we do this, we do this, and that doesn't work anymore. I mean, you need to be thinking about your customer. You need to think about the prospective student and really what they're going to get out of the experience. So you're not selling a class, you're selling a result.
Mark, that's exactly the line I outlined in my book. So we had the same insight, which is great. Speaking of shifting, one of the challenges I have, the leadership is on board at my institution, and they trust us to do the best job and decide what works and what doesn't. The challenge I'm having is shifting my team to think in a different way, because I have authors on my team who are so used to writing articles and writing books, but they don't understand digital, and they don't understand how to translate this content to different platforms and different formats. And that's a challenge I'm having right now, is educating them and gently but forcefully pushing them in this direction, so we can adapt the great content we have to the different channels that we manage. And if you have any ideas on how to transition and shift and encourage them, I'm all ears.
Great. That's great.
I mean, some training would be good. There are different free resources, of course, that you can use. If you don't have, of course, if you work at a community college, you probably don't have necessarily the professional development funds to send them to conferences, but there are lots of other resources available. So the two institutions I worked at were small private colleges with a small marketing team. But we did a lot of work to help integrate communications and marketing to really work together, and to plan content where the news stories were already planned to really integrate with ads we were doing, with social media content we were doing. And often that was the same person doing it. A lot of times it was me. So coming from like more of a newsy press release background and then translating that for social media and just learning really on the job how to do that. I mean, I didn't have any formal training for that, but I had to really just learn as I went. So a lot of it is really just being put in that position, being given some resources, free or, inexpensive. I mean, there are so many platforms out there. Sprout Social was a great platform we used. It's not the cheapest one, but they have great articles and great resources to help you with that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe easier when you have one person as a content creator, but we have a workflow. We have somebody responsible for content, somebody for design, somebody for digital distribution. And how do you bring them all together and align and create a process that works for everyone? So that's not a challenge I'm having, but we're getting there. It's a process. But that's, Brian, for maybe you're writing it in your next book, but it would be great to have more examples. At the end of the book, you have an optimization process, which I love. It's great. But can you give us examples? This is what I did. This is what worked. These are the metrics I'm tracking. So that's always helpful. So I don't have to look for another resource. I can just give them your book and say, there you go.
I've done training with small institutions and large institutions. And one of the first things I say is that Aristotle told us that the point of any story is what happens to the hero, and the institution is not the hero. And what I find is that all the writers in the room, their attention kind of perks up. They get very interested. They come to the edge of the chair, and all the managers in the room get very, very nervous, and they start to move to the back of their chair. And again, I mean, I think advocating for the basics of story is really important. And I think, Brian, you've done a great job of reminding us that. Somebody talked earlier about impact and outcomes. I was working with a college, and like many colleges, they were starting a nursing program. And I mean, I read through all the market data and I understood, the narrow opportunity they had to distinguish themselves in the market. But ultimately, it came down to finding someone who could express that in a more visceral, emotional way. And it was during the pandemic, and I found one of their graduates who had gone into nursing after majoring first in philosophy. And I tracked her down and I spoke to her about working in the ICU during the pandemic. And I asked her, I said, what difference does it make that you have a philosophy degree and you're working in nursing during a global pandemic? And she said, without this philosophy degree, I would be unable to speak with families about these end-of-life decisions that they're making. And the interview was so stirring and so moving and so visceral. And it somehow broke through all the layers of institutional whatever. And the president ended up bringing that story to countless audiences, alumni and donors and hospital partners. So I think sometimes just the basic work of reporting is what's missing in institutions. And when I work with younger writers who did not have years of working in the newspaper world, there's some reluctance to actually pick up the phone and call a stranger. And sometimes that's just what it takes, and you might have to do that 20 times before you get the quote and the person and the character you need, but your story needs character setting and plot. And if you don't have those three elements, you just have a brochure. And if you look at the science behind it, when they put humans in a functional MRI machine and they read the brochure copy, nothing happens. And when you put them in a functional MRI machine and you read them a story with character setting and plot, that's why we all sign up for Netflix. Their brain lights up in remarkable ways. So there is science behind this. This is not just, anecdotal. So anyway, I think, Brian, you've done a great job of reminding us that story ultimately carries the day. I was at AMA years ago and somebody made the comment, data will get you to the edge of the chasm, inspiration will carry you across. And I try to follow that guideline every day.
That is a strong quote. Yeah, it's all about what resonated with me as well is like the chapter 3 on audience first, how you have to tap into emotional agendas of the audience to move them, like we described earlier. But what also spoke to me was Jill's comment about the donor and how that donor sometimes directs the content on the website, but how the website is obviously most often the front door to the institution digitally, and that it has to convey the benefit of that particular institution to that prospective students, and why they should come to your institution, and not push the offering that we have, but the outcome that they're ultimately looking for, and find a way to communicate that through storytelling, like we just discussed, especially when it comes to spotlights. I think spotlights are so relevant, so important. And, I thought to myself, what's the best way? I'm on the vendor side, so it's more difficult for me to find those personas, talk to them, get them online, to get more information about it. But in the book, Brian, you outlined you can just walk out on campus and talk to your students and see what they're experiencing, get real-time feedback on certain things that may work and that may not work, so you can adjust properly. I would like to hear something about from the institutional leaders here, like Allison. How have you come across? How do you find those audience insights at your institution?
Hi, everyone. I think the best way to gather audience insights is never stop learning from them. We're sort of in this constant thinking of, okay, if we want to understand this, how best to, and there's all different things. We'll send out little short surveys, 1-question surveys. We will look at survey data from after student tours. We will look at what they tell us on their application, any kind of student information we really collect and analyze and try to build some real true audience insights that can then contribute to those personas, right? But earlier, when everyone was talking about some of the frustrations that we have, especially working with campus partners and getting them to understand how all of this should work, and the idea of we've really been promoting our programs, right, more than maybe our brands or the actual end result, the outcomes of what our educational experience is. And I have a good story for all of you. So I had a faculty member who didn't want me he does want me to promote his particular program, but now he also wants me to promote the idea of fusion pathways that he's come up with. So it's hard enough to sell an individual major to an undergraduate student, right? He wants me to sell the combinations of majors that students should be talking about or considering. And I'm like, gosh, I can't even get them to just think about data science. And now he wants me to do data science plus astrophysics plus business. Let's do all of the things. And, 17-year-old, most of them are undecided anyway. So where I got him to was I explained how just talking about one major is difficult enough. It's the audience might almost get intimidated or overwhelmed by the idea of choosing all of these combinations when they're not even in college yet. So I actually brought him back an idea that's about content marketing. So we're developing some content around concepts like why smart students don't just pick one major, that they build their own path. So not selling specific combinations. By the way, he wanted flyers for all of these infinite number of combinations that we could have for programs. Want a job after college, this trick will make you more hireable. And the trick could be double majoring or finding the right majors that combine well with yours, or this unexpected combo could land you a job at NASA or Google. So I flipped his idea on, okay, let's explain to students how this concept is helpful and how Sienna does that naturally through how we have built our curriculum. So it's possible. He was sold on the idea. He bought it. I did not get pushback. So sometimes we have to think of creative ways, I think, too, to understand the problem they're trying to solve. Because he was well-intentioned, of course. But how can we find a way that it actually works for our audience, because we know our audience, but helps him solve what he's trying to solve too?
I can kind of chime in. This is an example that is over 5 years old now, but I was fortunate enough to spend a long time at UMass Lowell. We had a 45-person marketing team. So we had a beat writer for every college. It was an in-house agency that did exceptional work. But before we went into lockdown, before the pandemic was even a thing, UMass Lowell had a few suicides on campus that kind of clustered, and it was not good. Obviously, when a campus goes through something like that, everyone is shook up. Every semester, my boss made it a point to sit down with each one of the colleges just to have a gut check. How are we doing? Do you feel like we are serving you? We would come with data. Here are the pieces we put out about your college. Here are the stories, and here's the traction we got. And I went to one of those meetings to sit down with all the department chairs in the engineering college, which is UMass Lowell's premier college, and educated them a little bit on Gen Z and the challenges at the time around Gen Z and how anxiety and depression was growing. And we saw that on campus, and that if we wanted to really combat the fact that UMass Lowell was a big institution, how could we talk to Gen Z and demonstrate that it isn't that big, and we do have a nurturing environment? And one of the department chairs said to me, one of the students who took their own lives was best friends with one of my students, and we just rallied around him. He decided to hike the Appalachian Trail without any training. He had never hiked before, and he was just going down a spiral, and myself and another faculty member met him on the trail several times. And I went back to my director of editorial services, and I said, I think this is a story. It's not pretty. This is not a pretty story, but darn it, it's authentic, and it talks about the nurturing environment of UMass Lowell. So she put that in the magazine, and our alumni were really proud of it. And then we put it on social, and we put it into our communication plan for prospective students, talking about how at the time we were one of the first JED campuses, and what are we doing to support our students and their mental health. And that whole trickle across the brand, and taking the content and reworking it for different audiences and reworking it in different modes, really, it was a win. And faculty and staff all said thank you to our department. So just that was something that I think about day to day, even to this day. And how can I do that again? And how can I do it at different campuses? So
Yeah, there's a beautiful story about that, what you just shared, especially when during a crisis, right? There's one part of the book that I read here, I think it was chapter 4, it's about trust, and our audiences are looking for trust and a source of truth. And with the erosion of trust in the media and in the political parties, if you can't be that outlet that they can lean on to get the perspectives and get the updates that they need to their questions, they're not going to look for it if they feel like that you're just trying to sell them all the time. But if you built that community on your campus and with your audience, and you built that trust, they'll lean in, and good things will come out of it. And if you share those stories, like you said, of the person who went on the Appalachian Trail, that may have very little to do with your offering, but it is a way to build community and help others resonate with what they were dealing with. So I think there's a really good part of you to go out there and meet that person. But Emma, I really want to hear from you, because you're on the front lines as a communications coordinator. Can you share a little bit about how you use content marketing at your institution?
Yeah, so there was so much I took away from this book. I take the lead on a lot of social media, so it really just made me think about the why behind our posts. So, we're not just posting to say that we post once a day, every day of the week, right? And I know Maya mentioned she has ambassadors, and they've just been such a great resource for us too. We just recently brought on another student, so like we get so much insight from the student body on what's working, what's not working, what's resonating with them. And Kristen, I really appreciated how you pointed out, like, not all stories are going to be like this perfect, beautiful story, but going back to like authenticity, like it's so important to stay authentic and keep in mind who we're talking to. And in Brian's book, there was a point where it said, um, it's easy, it's tempting to go back and talk about ourselves, like make it about us, and it's not about us. Like it's about who we're trying to reach. But yeah, there was just so much powerful stuff in here. My highlighter and sticky notes were both working overtime, but another thing that was said earlier that I really resonated with was we have a lot of departments that run their own like social media, like athletics and booster clubs, and there's so many different voices. And so in Brian's book, it said something about like we need to have like one brand voice, not every single department. So that's something that we struggle with as an institution. Like how do we speak as SEC, not just SEC athletics, SEC this. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, really, really. Thank you for sharing that. First of all, I really thought, she had some good experiences there as well. And I wanted to hear from you because you're still on the front line as a communications coordinator. So I wanted to hear from you a little bit more about that and what you took away from it. But we have about 15 minutes left. Let's ask the questions to Brian. Brian's right here. If you have any questions about the book, how things are done, now is your time to talk to him and ask him some questions.
I have a quick question. In the book, you mentioned talking about rethinking how we look at faculty publications. It's like so often faculty are looking for their tenured publications in academic journals. And you mentioned something about looking at the stuff that you're producing on the website in a smaller format and stuff, counting toward that. Have you had experience with that happening actually?
No. But
Pie
we
in the
do,
sky, right?
right. It's a great idea. We do repurpose a lot of that.
Mhm.
But we have to obviously repurpose it with an eye towards where it's adding value for the particular audiences. We have been focusing on going back and since we have so many different schools and departments where people don't necessarily give credit to the University of Rochester when they publish their work. Sometimes they give it to, the school they belong to. So that has impacted our rankings. So now we're going back and like retroactively changing those so that, they will point back to the larger institution. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting concept, but I'm sitting there, oh, I feel like some of our academics would find that a hard sell. So, and you try to convince them to cut their research down into a consumable chunk of content that you could share somewhere else. They're like, but it's this, it's like massive stacks of research. I can't. And you're like, okay.
I had a question, Brian. You had a lot of people in your book quoted. How'd you get a hold of all these folks and get those answers from them?
Yeah, I just reached out, and that was really, when I was writing the second edition of Epic Content Marketing, as I was working on that book with Joe, I just kept finding these places. I was like, oh, well, this is like perfect for higher ed. Higher ed needs to be doing this. And then I started looking around and I didn't find very many examples of institutions that were actually actively doing it. So then I've, just started reaching out to the network of people that I knew in higher ed, some of the different leaders and things that I knew and people I knew from conferences and stuff like that. And the last question I asked when I started doing these interviews, I think I had like 10 people identified. The last question I asked was, who else should I be talking to? And that, steamrolled and I got up to 50 and I was like, all right, that's all the people that I can include. And that's all the people, and I still had, probably 10 or 15 different names of people. And that was probably the hardest thing about the book. When I went back and listened to all the interviews again and figured out what quotes I wanted to use, the hardest part was trying to figure out, I mean, I could have written 2 whole books with just quotes and insights from people. So trying to figure out what were the most impactful, what fit into the rest of the format of the book, and what I thought would be the most valuable to the readers, because it's all content marketing.
Yeah.
Brian, what was the biggest thing you learned from the process?
Probably the thing that would have saved me the most time is if I would have just written down timestamps while I was doing the interviews the first time, of things that, you know, I was like, I'd be listening, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's a great quote, I'm going to use that. And then, 2 months later, when I started going back through all the interviews, I had to re-listen to every, 25 hours of re-listening to all the interviews to pull all those out. But, yeah, I would say that was like the biggest time-saving lesson I learned. The biggest kind of lesson I learned overall was that there are institutions out there that are doing this really well, and there are pockets within different institutions that are doing a fantastic job with this and seeing the value. Um, and that was one of my favorite quotes from Allison, was where she was talking about the impact that content marketing has on enrollment, was like similar to that from a campus visit. I was like, that's awesome. And there's just, so many institutions that just don't see it. And the conversation at the beginning of this about the fear and, the worry about doing this. The other problem is that content marketing is a long-term process. You can't build a relationship and create that trust with an audience in a 4-month campaign. You can't do a content marketing campaign. So getting leadership to understand that this is like, a 12 to 18 month commitment to consistently creating some sort of valuable content, comes with its challenges. But we're starting to see more and more, we're seeing a ton of brands that are getting on this, and we're seeing more and more institutions that are also starting to do this. So, oh yeah, workshops with K-6, that's it, right? Start early.
True. Curious to get your take on this, Brian. One of the things that I most appreciated about the book is it looked at the intersection of authentic human storytelling and AI, and how AI can help amplify and further these stories. I'm curious to get your perspective on, as these AI tools continue to become more and more sophisticated and sentient, if you may, how do you think it's going to impact that intersectionality of human-based stories and technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're starting to see, like in some of these AI tools, where you'll be talking with them, carrying on a conversation with them, and they will say that they did things, or yeah, last time I was on a walk with you. Like, well, that's, so they can make up stories. But I think, in a higher ed, we have so many stories at our disposal. And I think it's so critical that we be transparent with our use of generative AI, that we don't need to use it for that. We don't need to use AI to create the original content. We have great writers. We have great communicators. Let's use those to create that original content, and then use AI to, repurpose, redistribute, retarget, but always start with that original content, those original stories. So many questions that AI is bringing up into the whole process. Yeah, that's a good point, Susan. Use AI to scale, to distribute, to repurpose, retarget, and ideate. It's great at all of those things. We don't need to use it to create the stories. We have the stories.
Brian, I have a question. In the spirit of who else should I be talking to, what else should we be reading, or what are you reading right now?
So I just, while I was actually working on the book, I was reading Robert Rose's Content Marketing Strategy. So if you're really looking at doing content marketing, that is a fantastic guidebook to that. I just finished Susan's book, Pass Fail, which I loved. I loved that there was so much crossover in that. So many things that we were both talking about. So I'm looking forward to talking about that at the next book club. And then, kind of one of my favorite higher ed books is How to Market a University. And Teresa was one of the first people that I talked to when I started doing interviews for my book. So those are a few. I mean, any of these are great. I could recommend all sorts of books. We could have a whole conversation just about different books.
Okay, we have time for one more question. anybody has something burning in their minds, like, let's let it out.
Okay,
so I think
can I ask the last question, Chris?
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I'd like to ask Brian, with the changing student expectations and the digital behavior stuff, what major shifts do you foresee in student recruitment over the next 5 years? Do you think there are some major changes that's going to happen, and how should we adapt to that, or how should we prepare for that?
Yeah, I think we're gonna see all sorts of things change in the next 5 years, in the next 3 years. I think, AI is gonna have a huge impact on our society. I think just from a jobs, careers perspective, we're gonna see a lot of things that we're doing currently that we're not gonna need to do in the future. So that's going to be a challenge, I think, for all of us. I think short term, we're going to have to think about, the enrollment cliff. We're going to have to think about targeting different audiences, looking for, different continuing students. I hope that more universities start leaning into community, into the sense of building that sense of belonging, creating lifelong learners that are, constantly coming back to us. I think AI is going to kind of destroy institutions whose only offering is knowledge transfer, because we're going to have all the knowledge we want at our fingertips. So we're not going to be able to just use that. There's a lot more that higher ed institutions teach you about life than just the regurgitation of knowledge. So yeah, I used to ask people what their predictions were for 2 to 3 years out on my podcast when it came to AI. You can't even go that far out anymore. So I heard an institution the other day, I was talking to them, and they were coming up with a 5-year AI roadmap. Well, why? It's going to all change within, 2 to 3 weeks. That's right, Allison. It's changing so fast. So I hope that answered your question, Sandy.
I think I heard somebody else trying to ask a question there. Is there anybody else?
Yeah, I would just, this is a big question. Tom's already asked it, but you said it yourself, Brian, you've got enough material for 2 books. So when's that next book coming out?
Already started working on it. And still trying to hone in on the specific audience, the value prop, all the key things. But yeah, lots of ideas.
Perfect. Okay,
Awesome.
Now everybody, that was a great book club. Next book is going to be Pass Fail, as we said, from Suzanne Brinker. You can get it on Kindle and Amazon. Any other place, Suzanne, where they can get it?
I think also technically on Ingram Spark. That's if you want hardcover, but yeah, Amazon is probably your best bet.
Best bet. Cool. Give me a little bit of a background on it so I don't have to read this. What's the book about?
The book is about higher ed leadership and how it's more important than ever. It's packed full of case studies, interviewed amazing people like Allison, for example, who's on this call about their institutions, and also has some personal narrative and mission-based pieces. So I'm really excited to hear what you all think.
Perfect. And I'll share about this in the group as well. Next meeting, I'm thinking March 12th. Anybody have any objections? I'm not sure if this falls on spring break. I mean, Georgia has spring breaks in April, but if you can do March 12th at noon again, if that works for everybody or most of you, that would be great. Then I can schedule, and I'll if you cannot make it, I'm going to record these, and I'm going to share the recording with the group tomorrow. So for the folks that weren't able to come, we have the group. Feel free to post in there, any takeaways on the book while you read it. Make it interactive. I know it's an open group, so if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too. We'll meet on March 12th and discuss the book. But other than that, I thank you all very much for being a part of it today. Really great turnout. I'm really proud of you all for coming today, committing to this, reading the book, and I'm thrilled this has taken off. So thank you, everybody. I wish you a good month. Happy reading, and we'll see you next time, okay?
Thank you, Chris.
See you.
Bye.
Everybody. Great to see you.
Bye-bye. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into the show and sticking with me to the end. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Education Marketing Leader and share it with your friends and your network. This episode was brought to you by Scribe-A-Sound Podcast Production. It's one of my ventures. If you ever thought about starting your own podcast, be sure to reach out to me. I would love to help you. Follow the show and tune in every other Thursday as I interview higher ed marketing leaders for your benefit. I'll see you next time. Have a good day, friends. Take care.